Hmm.
Welcome to Raw and Unedited, the place where association executives like you receive the innovation, insight, and solutions to make you a more effective leader. Now, let's face it, you probably have some people that are a little bit difficult in your organization, and you're probably going crazy, go, my gosh, how do I work with these people? Well, today is exciting because we have Steven Iwersen, author of the Porcupine Principles, and he's going to talk to us about how to deal with prickly people. So, Steven, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And, you know, we're going to make sure that we take this interview today through the window of helping trade association executives and their staff. So I think that if we can go for some impossible answers, we're going to do it. Before I go too much further, I got to say one thing that Stephen's book is a parable, and you know, maybe I'm a softie, but I love business books that are parables. And the reason I really, really, really like them is because it's kind of like in story. There's this setup, and it gives you the scene, and then it goes in and it goes through the conflict and the solution, and it's like watching a business movie. And so with that, you know, why and how did you come up with this porcupine race thing for your book?
Well, I'll tell you, I wrote the book almost 1.5 years ago as a classical nonfiction business book. And it was almost ready to push off for publishing, and I didn't like it. I like the content and I like the principles that I teach in the book, but it just didn't feel right. And it dawned on me that when I'm on the stage or I'm working with a group, a day of training or a keynote, I use a lot of story to convey the content so that there's something memorable that they can hook to those practical applications. And when I looked at that original book, I thought, well, it's full of lots of stories, but nothing that's really memorable in my opinion. And so I literally put it on the shelf and refused to publish it. And a few weeks later started thinking, how could I convey these truths that I'm wanting to help people with in a way that will really stick, you know, porcupines. It worked. Yeah. And the idea of the story actually came from an event that I've witnessed now for, and I hate to say it, but over 40 years. And it's the World Championship porcupine races in Council, Idaho. And I know everybody says, seriously, there's an event like that. There is. And that event gave me kind of the analogy or the metaphor of how do you deal with sometimes a partner who isn't interested in participating in the goal that you have in mind. And that's what the races are about. They have porcupines that they have to try to move from a starting line to a finish line, and they can't do it in an inhumane way. They have to be persuasive. And so I use that story to kind of set the stage for the parable that we have there.
Well, it sounds like exactly what association executives are dealing with. I mean, they've got to deal with their board of directors. Now, you've been an association exec, have you not?
I've worked with nonprofits, and I've been on boards and served as a chairman of a board for one.
So you understand. So, you know, in looking at what is referred to the chief staff executive, and that might be a CEO job title or a executive director job title, but, you know, the top paid person. They've got the challenge of working with their staff, and their staff may be 1 or 2 people, it may be 200 people. They've got the challenge of working with their board of directors, and that may be a manageable 10 people, and some still have 50 or 100, which is not manageable. So in your book, you have characters, Carter and Danielle. And Carter, as I read the book, it's like, well, is Carter Steven? And then Danielle, the mentor. So early on in this conversation between the two of them, she talks to Carter about basic human need, you know, respect, being valued, and autonomy. And if people don't get those, then they demonstrate dominance, retaliation, and isolation. How did this come to you? How did you discover this?
Well, I've been teaching basically human behavior for a long time, and of course we have lots of models, and many of the models about behavior have at least 5 to 7 layers of people's needs. But when I looked at it, my goal is to make it as simple as possible to understand. And when I put it all together, I realized there's 3 things that I know I want, and when I work with staff members and with people who we serve, really I could boil it down to those 3 things. Everybody wants to be respected. Everybody wants to have a sense of value, to be valued, but to also feel like they are contributing some kind of value. Or another way of saying is everybody wants to be wanted. And the third one is having that ability to just do what they need to do without being micromanaged. So I use the word autonomy. Another word for that would be everybody just wants to have control. Mm-hmm. And when those 3, I think, are working well, and I feel like I'm being respected by you, you value what I'm doing and how I can help you, and you treat me that way, and then you give me the room to do my job or to contribute to the association as a member or a staff member, whatever it may be. You treat me in that way, I'm probably going to be just fine and work with you towards the goal, even if the goals seem a little insurmountable, because that dynamic of those 3 working together feels good to me. I'll look for ways to be a contributing partner in that. But if I feel like you're trying to micromanage me, if I feel like you don't really value me as a member, or you don't value me as an employee or a peer, and if I feel at any point you don't respect me, I'm going to start to feel emotionally some pushback. It will, to use the porcupine analogies, like a porcupine, when they feel threatened, they cause all of their little spikes, their quills to push out because they go into a defensive mode. It's not an aggressive mode as much as it's just intended to defend themselves from what they think is a personal or potential attack. And I think people do the same thing. And so, as you already listed, I see the 3 typical behaviors as I'll try to be dominant and I'll get my way, or I'll retaliate by maybe a good example would be I'll retaliate by not doing what you wanted me, so I set you up for failure. Or isolating, people just get quiet and they don't talk and they don't tell you what the real needs are. They really draw away from it. And so when I see those 3 behaviors, dominating, retaliating, and isolating, when I see that, that's an indication to me that one of the 3 basic needs isn't being met. And instead of getting mad about the way that they're behaving, I as a leader need to ask, well, what of those 3 needs might we need to address? Because it's possible that I have done something or we've missed something in the dynamics with that person that maybe we can correct it. We just fix it a little bit and it'll probably make them feel, again, back to the valued and respected and the autonomy.
I really liked in the book the way you had the protagonist, Carter, learn and discover where he maybe was not doing the best job through the analogy of the race with the mentor. And when I was reading, I'm thinking, wow, so frequently leaders don't want to hear where they need to do better. And what gave you the idea to put it together in such a way? I'm very impressed with the way the book was written, to where I'm just the average guy, and as I'm reading it, and it's being revealed to Carter, he's discovering where he maybe could have done better as the CEO of his company, and I'm reading it and I'm accepting that for me. And I'm going, oh yeah. How did you come across it? Is that the way that you coach people when you go into companies?
It is. Yeah, it's the real core of how I coach people. I think that self-discovery, allowing people to look at information and circumstances and to see things, sometimes by asking them the right questions, they begin to see things that maybe they didn't see before. I'd rather them discover it for themselves and have that moment than for me or another leader to come up in their face and say, here's your problem and here's how you fix it. I think if you help them look at things from different angles, giving them better information sometimes, and then giving them a little time to process it, they will typically come up with their own answers. Sometimes their answers aren't quite what we want or how we would fix it. But I believe, and this is one of the things I like to coach leaders on, is that if their solution or their idea of how to fix it is at least moving in the right direction, what do you care if it's done exactly the way you wanted it done? Give them that space, because now I'm going back to helping them feel respected, valued, and have the autonomy. And if that's the going, and they're moving where we want to go, I need to make sure that I let them have that. If it doesn't work for them, then I can say, hey, have you thought about maybe doing it this way? And I think at that point, they're a little bit more open to suggestions. But first, we've got to build on their ideas.
Got it. Let me see. I'm going to pick the next question carefully. In looking at the book, okay, you're talking about the people that don't feel respected, valued, and given autonomy. Those people dominate, retaliate, or isolate. But when we get back to the CEO, now, again, the audience for this cast is association executives. So when the association executive is either not getting the response from their employee or not getting the response from the volunteer leader, and they're trying to push, they're trying to lead by example, they're not seeing where they can actually be causing the porcupine to pop their quills. How do you help people with that?
Well, sometimes it's just having a really honest conversation with that leader. All of us as leaders, and I know that most association executives, they have a vision statement. They've got a mission that they've got to accomplish, and within the scope of all that, there's certain objectives. It might be financial, revenue. It might be membership goals. It could be creating greater member value. All of those things, they've got to achieve those tasks, but they have to do it within the context of a team, and especially with volunteers. And sometimes their manner of how they go about trying to get that done comes across as brash, insensitive. I've seen a couple executives come into an association that had a lot of history, and yet that history was starting to slow down, and they were losing their momentum because culturally, things have changed, and they did not share necessarily the history. They could appreciate it, but they didn't necessarily share it. And so they behaved in a way that was, for some of their members, they made their members feel like they were just throwing out the history of their association and disregarding it, and all the investment that was put into it, all to push out for some new ideal.
Okay.
And they never talked about the legacy and how they could bridge the legacy to a new chapter, or a new experience.
Okay.
And so sometimes we have to come alongside of them and say, one of the things that you probably want to do is to do less talking, a little bit more listening.
So that leads into, in the book, you state, I'm going to quote it here, don't react to the quill. The unmet need behind it is what's causing it.
Mm-hmm.
So how do people not react to the quill? It's like I'm a CEO and I've got Sam or Susie or whoever that just, no matter what I say, no matter what I do, they're that doubting Thomas, that negative Sally.
Mm-hmm.
Am I causing that by how I approach them? Am I going in there wrong?
Sometimes we do, but I think more often it's not us causing it. It is simply the manner in which that person likes to approach things and do things. It may be an issue of feeling competitive. They feel like you have a different direction than they're comfortable doing. Or they just have a manner in which they they're always kind of the prickly person. I'll give you an example. And I'll even name him. His name was Morris. Morris was on a board of directors that I was leading. And every time I would visit with Morris one-on-one about some new things that we were trying to accomplish, he would be supportive. And I'd go and I'd have coffee with him or whatever it may be, and we'd just talk. And he never, in our private conversations, pushed anything back at me or gave me any indication that he didn't like an idea. But the minute we'd walk into the boardroom and get everybody around the table, we'd start talking and start moving towards a consensus. And all of a sudden, he'd raise his hand and he'd start throwing out questions that were against. At least it felt like it was against it. And all of a sudden, he'd have this capacity to move the conversation to this, well, there's doubt now. Maybe this isn't the right thing to do. And I would leave those meetings with some decisions tabled, some decisions completely shut down. And it happened month after month. And I finally decided to take him to coffee and sat down with him and looked him in the eyes and said, Morris, here's what's going on. And on one hand, you seem really supportive, but then when we get in that boardroom, it feels like you shoot me down. Can you help me understand? And that's a phrase I want to encourage people to think about using more often. Can you help me understand? Can you help me understand? Can you help me understand why? And then I laid it out. And he smiled and he says, I am still very supportive, but I've learned a long time ago that sometimes board members don't really think through the full picture of some of the decisions that we make. And I'm not trying to be devil's advocate, but I want to make sure that we have not just embraced something new for the sake of new without understanding the full context and its impact on the organization. So I guess maybe I'm doing a devil's advocate, but it's not intended to hurt. It's just to try to get people to think. And I looked at him and said, well, dang it, if you had told me that before we went to the boardroom, I wouldn't have been so mad at you for the last 3 months. That helped me gain perspective. So the next time he did it, I was prepared with the information that they were going to need. And he really actually helped me to become a better leader by doing that.
Got it. I see. So he helped everybody to have a better discussion, which then when they made the decision, they were probably more locked in. They probably were more confident. But because you didn't know what he was doing, it seemed like, what? Okay,
right.
Got it. In the book, and that leads in, it states, people would rather be invited than told.
Yes. Yeah.
That really hit me, that, as I think about, that makes a lot of sense. Why is it you think that so often so many leaders get into a mode of just telling rather than inviting? Where does that come from?
Well, for me personally, I'm the personality type that wants to drive and get it done and not waste any time. And if there's a path that we can take to get there, let's go for it. When somebody doesn't seem to have the same passion or see the same path and they want to slow down and think it through a little bit more, I know that I can get impatient with that. And so I'll start to tell them things that I think that will help them be better informed. But it's kind of back to that, giving people time to think so that they're better prepared. I'll give you an example. I had an employee years ago that was doing really well, except for one aspect of his job. And he just kept coming short of reaching the goal that he was supposed to reach. And I started to watch how he was doing his daily routines and how it impacted his weekly routines. And I think I figured out what was keeping him from hitting his target. So I talked with him casually, like they teach us to do in management classes, an informal conversation, and kind of help them and coach them a little bit. And he gave me the high five and, hey, I'll do a good job. And a few weeks later, still no improvement. So I brought him in and I sat him down. And this was where that idea of people would rather be invited than be told kind of started to take root in me. I sat him down and I'm learning to ask better questions. And so I said to him, I said, can you tell me what your goals are? And he said, so we hit it. And I said, do you remember we talked about this one a few weeks ago? And he says, yeah, I know. And I said, but you're not hitting it. Do you think you know why you're not hitting it? And what could we do to improve it? And Ed, I swear he looked at me and he gave me the Scooby-Doo. Everybody's heard it. He looked at me and he said, I don't know. I don't know. And he didn't know. And that I don't know, just, it's my personality. I hear that I don't know, like fingernails on chalkboard, and I wanted to tell him what I had already observed. But I knew if I told him, I would still own the problem, and he wouldn't take any responsibilities or be accountable for it. So instead of pushing him, I used one of the principles we teach in the book, and I kind of contained my own need to drive, and I pulled back a little bit, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you think about it for the next 24 hours? Let's get back together, and I'd like to know what you think are the reasons why and what we can do to improve. And when we came back, he started to say to me, well, one of the reasons why, and he named the thing that I had already observed.
Oh, really?
He did. And I didn't say a word about I didn't say, well, I already knew that. But I sure could have I could have kept us from wasting 24 hours if I had told him the day before. But when he said, well, I think it might be, and he named it, I looked at him and said, oh, so what can we do to change it? And he already had an idea of how to change it. That conversation pushed him a little bit, and I shouldn't say pushed, but it kind of led him to this self-discovery of, oh, here's why, and here's what I can do. And as soon as he said that, I said, well, why don't we give that a try for the next month, and let's revisit this and see how it's working. When he walked out the door, I got the fist explosion with sprinkles, and he owned it and took the responsibility for it. If I had told him, here's your problem, here's what's wrong, here's what you have to do, I'd be bossing him instead of leading him.
So how can association executives use that in particular in dealing with their board of directors?
Well, I think that with board of directors, it's making sure that you have facts, less feelings, but lots more facts. Where are we at right now? Where do we need to be? And then asking them the questions. What do you think we can do to reach the goals we need to reach? What do you think are maybe some of the reasons why the association is being impacted in a negative way or a positive way? What are the trends? You could do the typical SWOT analysis if you want, but I think people get tired of the SWOT. So I'd suggest a couple other things. The first is asking, what's our status quo? And status quo is just simply, what's the current state of things? Then I want to ask, what are some of the assumptions that we're making? Now, assumptions can be things that are good or bad, but basically the definition of assumptions is not the street version, the raw and unedited version, but the real definition of assumption is anything that we've come to believe as true, but we don't have any proof. So for an association executive, we might be thinking, well, I think that the members don't like X because, but I don't have any proof of that. So what I need to do is find out what are the assumptions and then go and start finding out what's the evidence of that instead of moving forward or pulling back without any confidence. And then the third thing I'd like to suggest is look at the habits and routines, especially as a leader in a board of directors. Do we have any habits or routines that are positively moving us forward or maybe negatively holding us back? And if we get really honest about those three things, then in a sense what you've done is you've invited them to start thinking, and they may discover what you already know. But if they discover it, they'll own it. And that'll hopefully lead you to the next step is, well, what's the next thing we can do? Here's the way I like to look at it. What is it that we're dealing with right now, and what can we do next? I don't think a lot of boards are really dealing with that question or that concept on a regular basis. We do it once a year at a strategic planning retreat. But I think every time we meet, we should be saying, okay, what are we doing right now? And what do we need to be doing next? And the next could be the next month, the next 6 months, the next 3 years. But it should always be a balance of that conversation.
Got it. You, in your book, you state persuasion requires guidance and information. So, okay, I'm getting the guidance using your analogy of the broom and the race. Not quite sure about the information part of it. How do you mean when you say persuasion requires guidance and information?
Well, I think if we have, again, kind of go back to what we just talked about, if we have the right information, what's the budget? What are the contributing factors of what's going on?
Mhm.
Not so much anecdotal,
Mhm.
but real facts.
Okay.
And looking at those and then informing people with those facts, it's important to do that. But there's another thing to consider as well. As we're going through change, we don't always know what's next with the change. We just know there's going to be a change. And I believe that leaders need to be communicating more frequently and a little bit more authentically, right up front with everyone that they work with, be it staff, peers, board, or members, just letting them know this is where we're headed,
Mhm.
and this is the best information we can give you at that time. And as soon as we have more, we will be feeding that to you on a regular basis. Too often we end up getting an announcement.
Mhm.
We are changing the name of the association.
Okay. That's happening a lot out there in the marketplace.
It does, and that's not a bad thing, but it's a bad thing when no one's been a part of the conversation leading up to it, or some information's been provided to them. And so when it's announced, and that's just one example, there's, we're selling the building and we're going to lease another property, whatever it may be. They could be all really great decisions, but when people hear the decision and it's a surprise to them, they're going to get prickly.
Wow.
And so if I'm guiding them in conversation and I'm providing them the best information and inviting them to contribute to that information, not just emotion, but real fact, how do you see this playing out? I think people will be more open to the final decision and the outcomes of it. So that's kind of what I mean in the book.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about the principles in just a minute, but before we talk about the principles, somewhere in your book here, you have, and I forgot where it was, you got a link to where people can watch a porcupine race?
Yes, they can.
What's the URL to that? Can you just...
You can go to the website, theporcupineprinciples.com.
Theporcupineprinciples.com.
Yeah, and there's a link for video. When you get on that homepage, there's 3 different videos. You just hit the video box, and it will take you to an actual video recorded of one of the races in Council, Idaho, the world famous porcupine races. Now,
I understand. I think I just saw something on social media that this book appeared in the newspaper up in Council, Idaho.
That's right. Yeah, the editor got a copy of the book, and he decided that he was going to go ahead and do a little article, and so it just released this week.
And it seems to me, something gnawing in my head, that you have some kind of deeper connection with Council than you mentioned earlier.
I do. I do. I was a little kid. Wow, I can do that.
Go ahead.
I was a little kid. I started grade school when my folks moved to Council, Idaho. My dad was the minister of the little mountain church up there in the mountains, and my mom was a school teacher. And the porcupine races was the brainchild of 3 Chamber of Commerce members who are trying to figure out how to have a charity event and raise some money for some special events that they wanted to do it and get a little bit more buzz in a town of 400 people.
What years?
Have some fun. What
were the years when they were working on creating this? When was that?
Yeah, well, now I got to get honest about the years. Okay, so it would have been in the late 60s when things got started. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I got to watch one of the first races. And back in the day, they didn't have a fence. And when you read the book, you'll understand. And you'll also see in the video, if you go to the website, you'll see that they have a fence. But way back when, they didn't have a fence. They trusted the crowd members who gathered around the little city park to serve as the boundaries.
Oh, really?
But you know what people do when rogue porcupines run straight at them? They kind of scatter.
Yeah, I would think so.
It only took them a few years to figure out that they needed a better boundary so that they could keep the race in the park.
Got it. So let's talk about the principles. And I'm going to usurp you just a little bit on this. So in the race, well, let me not even do it. So in the race, we've got the various elements of the race, which are your principles, and you've got 5 of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
So go ahead and tell everybody what they are.
Well, the first principle is what we call the principle of the starting line. And the principle is everyone deserves to be respected. And that's a pretty important one, because it's my belief that when we start, especially when we're working through change or we're having some kind of conflict, if we don't start with respect, we're not going to get a good start. And I'll just put it that way. There's a myth, and it's in the book. I don't want to give too much of it away, but there's a myth that we have believed for years, and that is that porcupines can shoot their quills, but they can't. But because we believe that, we act differently when we're around them. And when we think about the principle of the starting line, there's a myth that we've all believed, and that is that people earn respect. And I think that that's wrong. I think that people deserve to be respected. And if we start with that mindset, our interaction with people, regardless if we get along with them or not, it will naturally be a little bit different because we're thinking differently about the circumstances and the person. If they have a heartbeat, they deserve to be respected. They'll sense that. And I think that helps us get off to a better start with people. Second principle, you want to go to that one?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, it's the principle of the broom. Now, we call it the principle of the broom because at the races, what you'll see in the video, and when you read the book, you'll see it, they have some tools that they use to motivate their porcupine to the finish line. And one of them is a broom. The second one is a trash can, and then there's the boundaries, the fence. So we'll talk about those. But the broom, the principle of the broom, is, as I see it, is that the best decisions come from timely, meaningful information and clarity of direction. So best decisions come from meaningful information and clarity of direction. If we know where we're going, we have clarity about that, we have less conflict. But if nobody really knows where we're going to go, everybody has a different idea of where to go and how to get there. Meaningful information, well, the broom in the race, when they lift that trash can and the porcupine starts its race, it tends to move one way or another. And if it's moving in the direction you don't want it to go, you're not allowed to push it, poke it, or prod it. But you can inform it that the way it's going is not the right way, and you do that by putting the broom in front of its face. And when it sees that, it's now, oh, it's not an option available to me, and it will naturally move in a different direction, preferably where you're hoping it will go. So that's the principle of the broom. The third principle.
Before you go to the next one,
Okay.
I'm thinking when you talked about Morris earlier, and Morris, it's like he was the broom urging you as the leader to give more information.
He was.
That's
fascinating. He was. Here, I thought I was the one that was in charge of the broom, and that turned out to be Morris.
What's the next principle?
The principle of the trash can. The principle of the trash can is really, to me, it's about containment. Sometimes it's about containing our own emotions, containing things before they get out of control or maybe out of hand. So here's the principle. Thoughtful conversations can help to achieve positive solutions, but thoughtless confrontations will leave you running in circles. I'll talk about that second part first. Thoughtless conversations will leave you running in circles. When we don't think before we speak, or we don't allow other people to have a chance to think about the circumstances before we start to talk about them, we'll end up chasing each other in circles, and we don't make any forward progress. So the solution to that is thoughtful conversations, which means, one, I need to think a little more clearly. How do I say this? What's the best way to say it so that they receive it? What would matter to them? It's the proverbial, why does it matter to them in the first place? And then making sure that they have the time to think about stuff. When we have thoughtful conversations, we have a greater probability of achieving the outcomes we're hoping for.
Gotcha. Okay, so we've got number 1, the starting line. Number 2, the broom. Number 3, the trash can. Okay, so we got that. What's next?
The principle of the fence. And as I mentioned, years ago they didn't have a fence, but they do now because they've discovered that the boundaries, well, here's the principle. Boundaries well defined lead to greater possibilities. In the race, the boundaries actually becomes a very strategic part of the process, because when the boundaries are well defined, a porcupine runs up to that fence and it realizes, well, I can't go any further than that. That's not an option available to me. And so it will, again, just like the broom, it will self-correct and begin to move preferably in a better direction. The goal is to get that porcupine thinking about moving towards the space that has fewer obstacles in its way. It's the goal line.
Let me ask you about this. I'm thinking of the fence, and I'm relating it to associations and professional societies. I'm wondering, do they not have a reasonable fence in some cases, or are they using the fence as justification for non-performance, no innovation? What are your thoughts on that? Can that fence be a double-edged sword?
I think it can be. Yeah, I think it can be. I think we do need to revisit what are the boundaries. Boundaries in association could be policies and procedures. It could be budgets. It could be performance agreements that we have with employees. Anything that's defined up front, and we know that that's how we're going to interact, and this is how we're going to handle certain kinds of things or operate within. It could be the operating manual, either way you're looking at it, but that's the defined way of going about our business. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I think some people would like to tighten the boundary up so much that they're the ones who have more control, and there's not enough room for other people to have some freedom within the boundaries to come up with new ideas and move forwards to the goal. In fact, I think what sometimes happens is that there are a few people who like to treat the boundary as if it was the goal line.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so we got the starting line, the broom, the trash can, the fence, and the last one?
The last one's the finish line. And the principle of the finish line is pretty simple. And I brought this to the story because I realized early on that I was so driven to be successful that I wanted to reach a certain goal. I wanted to help some organizations that were kind of in a dying mode to, in a sense, resurrect and get back on track. And that my reputation and my career was going to be based on my success in doing that. And what I realized was that sometimes because I was so driven to make those goals happen, I forgot about the other people in the process. And so here's the principle of the finish line. A shared success is always better than standing alone.
A shared success is always better than standing alone. Mm-hmm. So bringing that for an association executive, he or she, if they get what they want and they bulldoze everybody through, it's kind of a hollow victory, huh?
It is. Yeah, it is.
Because probably people are gonna sabotage later.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, especially in associations, have seen this frequently. They have this attitude of, I've been here, and I've been a member, and I've been a leader in this association as a member for a long time. And I've seen association executives come and go. And you're only going to be here for a few years. So go ahead and do what you want because I'm going to outlive you. And you're going to go away and I'm going to take it right back to where we like it and where we want it. And then the association executive doesn't understand why they've had some conflict along the way.
Yeah.
And that success is pretty hollow. I also know that there again, it's kind of this whole mentality of it's lonely at the top. We've heard that phrase for years. It's lonely at the top. I think if it's lonely at the top, we've probably done it wrong. It's a community, not a committee. We're supposed to be building a sense of community within this context of association or within a business. And so the question is, how am I helping others to be successful so that when we do achieve the goals, it's a shared success. Everybody's happy about that. And if you were to go back to the races with me in Council, Idaho and watch, the goal is to get your porcupine across the finish line before any other team can do that.
Sure.
But here's the key. The porcupine has to cross the line first. Many times as leaders, we want to get to that goal line and we've got reluctant members, we got reluctant staff members, And we go, well, okay, I've got to work with them, but I still got to go. And so we push and we run to that line, and we do everything we can to coax them to follow, but they're really reluctant to do that. Just because I've crossed the line doesn't mean that we've won if they haven't crossed the line with me. So that's kind of what drove me back to this principle of a shared success is better than standing alone.
Yeah, Stephen, going through the book, I mean, it's like so much of what was going through my mind is like, wow, every association executive I know, I think should read the book, and I firmly believe this might sound a little bit patronizing, but I think that every association executive could read this and take something out of it and go, oh yeah, I get it. This applies to me. That applies to me. Mm-hmm. Now I realize that not everybody's going to absorb it all, but if there was one lesson that let me go back. Something in the book. It stated, the protagonist, Carter, stated, he said, I have to stop thinking like a boss and more like a coach. Mm-hmm. So is that really going to work for the association execs?
I believe so.
Yeah,
I believe so. Now, part of the challenge is that you may be hired as an exec for an association to be the leader, and your job description, all the performance evaluations, all the conversations during the interviews, it's always been about, we're looking for a leader to help us go from here to here. We want a leader. We want a leader. And so you go into that with a leader's mindset, and you're really focused on being that leader, only to find out within probably a few short weeks or a couple of months that really, for many people, they've hired a hired hand. They're going to make the decisions at the board level, and you're the one who implements or executes their vision. But their vision may be kind of limited, and you're looking at some other things that they could do and be very successful at. And so you bring those ideas because you're the leader, and you're trying to get them to move that direction, and they kind of brush you off because, well, you're the hired hand. And so it's almost this teeter-totter of trying to get the right balance. And when we coach leaders on a board and we help them see ways that they can contribute better, and we give them the process of making that happen, we get better results. If we boss, we're probably going to get fired.
Yeah, my guess is that for an association exec that's dealing with the problem of their board, trying to manage the association, managing their staff, rather than doing their job of leading, in a strategic manner, it makes sense what you're saying, that if that association exec that's having those kinds of problems looks at his or her job as, rather than leading this board, I'm coaching this board. Mm-hmm. I can see how that would make a huge difference, and that might be an answer a lot of people are looking for out there. Because I'll tell you, I'm here to tell you, one of the huge problems out there in the association society world is boards of directors trying to manage the paid staff.
Right.
It's not their job.
No, it's not. No.
So, Steven, if before we wrap this thing up, if there was one thing that you really wanted association executives to walk away with, now let's face it, I would hope they would read the book, but but not everybody's going to do that. Somebody's reading the book okay, I read the book, but if they don't read, if there's something that really mattered to you that Mr. and Ms. Association exec might do differently, what might that be?
I think the one thing that just really is the most important thing for me, and I think would be helpful to them, is to really come to terms with that very first principle of the starting line, and that's about the respect issue. Because everything else follows from that. If I treat Morris, my antagonist,
Yes.
with the idea that he deserves to be respected, that changes my interactions with him, and that naturally would begin to change the way he interacts with me. If I look at the bigger picture through that lens of respect, I believe we begin to see greater possibilities than the conflicts. We look at to use the analogy, the porcupine. You look at the porcupine, you see the entire animal, not just the quills. And I think that's really key. Some people will ask me, well, if people don't earn respect, what do they earn? My belief is they earn trust. Trust is going to rise or fall based on my interactions with them. So if you kept your appointment with me, my trust goes up. If my employee lies to me, my trust is going to drop. But I'll never allow myself to get to a point where, and I shouldn't say I'll never, but I certainly really try hard to never get to a point where I'm disrespectful to an individual. I want to make sure that that's my guiding principle, because everything else lines up much easier with that.
Awesome. So, Steven, let's do this. Let's do a shameless self-promotion for Steven Iwersen. So, yeah, why not?
Okay.
So, if an associate,
my shameless promotion.
So, if an association executive would want to work with you, how might they want to work with you? Would they want you as a keynoter? Would they want you as a coach? Would they want you to do workshops? How might an association executive want to work with you?
Well, the answer to that is yes. Primarily, I'm a keynoter. So if you have an event, you have a conference, something that you're doing, and you're wanting to create an experience, not just another talk or a motivational thing, something that really engages people in a different way than they probably have before, looking at really change. Because even though we talk about conflict is just a little thing that happens when we try to manage the change. And so if you're looking for that, I would love to have a conversation with you about making that happen. That usually leads to, would you come and talk with our members, maybe on a local basis, or our staff, and do a workshop on how to take these principles and really apply them into some practice. And so that's another piece of the business. And of course, sometimes that leads us to some coaching, and usually the coaching is to help somebody who realizes they are the ones who've become the porcupine, and just a few things might be helpful to them.
And let me give a full disclosure to all the association executives out there that know me. I've seen Steven do his presentation, and in the video, he uses the video in the presentation, and I was just kind of dumbfounded. So, I just want to let every association executive that knows me know that I can highly recommend Steven. I've seen him in action. I've seen him present. So, Steven, if somebody, you never know, they might believe me. If somebody, wants to get a hold of you, why don't you give them the website? And I don't know, do you want somebody to call, or how do you want people to communicate with you?
It's whatever works best for them. You can go to the website, theporcupineprinciples.com, or
principles plural.
Yes, plural. Or StevenIwersen.com. That's spelled StevenIwersen.com. It's going to take you to the same place, and there's a place to contact me there. Phone number, if you'd like a phone number, it's 913-406-3824. It's going to go directly to my line. You'll probably get the voicemail, but I'll get right back to you as soon as I can. So that's some ways to do it, and the website will give you the email as well.
And for associations that want to know where you live?
I live in whatever airport I'm flying through at the moment. I'm in the Kansas City area, so I'm right in the middle of the country, and I can get to just about anywhere in the U.S. within a half day and be a part of whatever I can do to help you achieve the goals you want.
That's awesome. Steven, it was a great session. It was, and I really enjoyed hearing your perspective. I really hope that everybody else out there does. And, the whole thing with this raw and unedited is they get the real Steven. If there was a wart or a bump or something, they get it all. So,
Yeah.
I think who you are here is who you would be if you went in with them.
That's true. Hey, can I make an offer to your viewers?
No.
Okay.
Sure. Go ahead.
Forget that. We'll just, if you'd like to get a copy of the book, go to the website and just go to the store. And when you get to the store, I want to give you a code that you can use to get a discount on the book, and we'll ship you a personalized signed copy of the book. And here's the code: coffee. That's all it is. You just type in the word where it says coupon or special. Just put the word coffee in there before you finalize your order, and it will give you I believe it's about a 25% discount on the book, and we'll get it shipped to you right away.
Well, I'm a little upset because I bought this one on Amazon. I paid full price.
You did, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
But you probably didn't pay shipping.
I do have Amazon Prime. That's right. That's right. Hey, Steven, again, it's been awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And what I'm going to do is, just so I don't look like a total idiot here, I'm going to find out where the stop video is. Okay, I found it. And right. So that way, when we end this, we can end it. So again, Steven, thank you so much. And to all the association executives watching this, give them a call. I think that you would. I think you'd really enjoy it. So bye for now, and I guess I'll see you in Dallas this summer.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ed.
Okay.
Appreciate being a guest on your show.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay. Are we still here?
I am.
Okay. Wait a minute. I just want to pause recording.